let me say, first of all, that I want to dedicate this shiur to the refuah shlema of a close friend who is actually fighting for his life in Baltimore, Maryland, Ruvain Halevi ben Masha. And so I'm hoping that he will have really what is a nace. He's pretty much of a young man, but unfortunately battling some severe illnesses. So we're going to talk today about Noach. He is a fascinating character. In many ways, one of the most fascinating characters in the Torah. He has a short name, the shortest in the Torah, along with Og, who also plays a little bit of a part in the story of Noach, because he, by midrashic tradition, he was able to hang on to the side of the Teva and thus be the only other human saved other than Noach's family. But the name is small, the story is big. And I wanted to maybe give you a different outlook on Noach. We all have our preconceived idea of who Noach is. And I often refer to him as the Rodney Dangerfield of the Torah because he gets no respect. And we'll see about that in a moment. But the Torah begins in the story of Noach, describing him in the most superlative of terms. In the very first pasuk, by the way, even before we get to Noach and his chapter, and remember, just the fact that he's one of only 6 people who have a Parsha named for them, that in itself is pretty impressive. But even before, in the end of Parshat Bereshit, we said the last word in Bereshit, so you might say the last word in creation, V'Noach matza chen b'nei Hashem. Noach found favor in the eyes of Hashem. It's, of course, a little play on words because Noach and chen, right, are the same word back, they're just reversed, the letters. But even so, that's high praise. And of course, it's not just a fanciful thing that Noach and chen have the same letters, but it's indicating clearly that this is someone that brought a great deal of satisfaction to Hashem. And then we begin the Parsha in very extremely superlative ways. Ela toldot Noach, Noach ish tzaddik, tamim haya bedorotav, et Elokim hitalech Noach. These are the generations of Noach. Noach was a righteous man. He was complete in his generation. He walked with God. Nowhere in the Torah do you see an intro. You talk about somebody being called to the stage and getting an introduction. Whenever I speak, all people say is, here's someone who needs no introduction. I hate that. You want someone to really say something nice about you, and the Torah really pours it on. And look at all the good things we say about him. Noach ish tzaddik. Right there, you have 2 superlatives. First of all, and if we were all unmuted, you can chime in and just, yell these out because I know you see them as well. We call him an ish. In the Torah, anyone referred to as ish it's always a very positive term. He's not just a, masculine, a male, but ish means he's an upstanding person. And you can see this reflected in other people that are called ish. One of them, for example, is Mordechai, ish yamini. It doesn't just mean he's a rightist. He's from Binyamin, but he's an ish. And then, of course, he's called a tzaddik. No one else in the Torah is called a tzaddik. Now, you may think, well, what about Yosef? Yosef HaTzadik. You won't find anywhere where it says that in the Torah. That's a name we stuck on Yosef. No one else in the Torah do we see called tzaddik, righteous. Then we're told tamim. Tamim is a very positive word, right? We use it by Yaakov in a very positive way. Ish tam yoshev ohalim. It means really wholesome. And that's the best English word for tamim. Some want to say perfect. Nobody's perfect. As I heard someone once say, when the rabbi said, nobody's perfect. So a man stood up in the audience and he says, that's not true. My wife's husband, he's the only person I ever heard who was perfect. My wife's first husband. Anyway, that's a joke. But Noach is called Tamim. I'd say wholesome. And then he walks with God. That's a beautiful phrase, that he walks with God. What else? Noach, you see that his name is doubled. Eila Toldot Noach, Noach. There's no punctuation in the Torah. The two names come together. And the rabbis teach us that wherever you see the name of a person repeated on the spot, it's an indication that this person has reached their highest potential. We have this belief that, and this is something the Zohar talks about, that you should live to be 120. At the end of our lives, we are shown a picture, a video, I would call it, of our life as we lived it, or our life as it could have been lived had we lived up to all of our potential. We see that, and the neshama, the Zohar says, gives out a scream heard from one end of the universe to the next, to the other, because we see what we could have accomplished. But those who actually use all of their gifts and strengths and blessings to live up to their potential, that name is repeated. So we see it by certain key individuals. We see it, of course, you all know, you're thinking of the Akedah with Avraham. We see it by Moshe. Yaakov has it as well, and so does Noach. This concept of the ideal Noach and the real Noach come together. So another beautiful superlative about Noach. And I will add just a couple of more. First of all, the Medrash says he's one of those rare individuals. He was Nolad Mahul, born already with a Brit Milah, another sign of perfection. He is the progenitor of all mankind, is he not? Along with wife Naamah. We're all related to Noach. We all come from Noach, obviously. But even more than that, Noach, in global, eternal terms, who could be more important than Noach? Because humanity as a whole lives by the Sheva Mitzvot B'nai Noach, the Noachide code, the 7 commandments given to Noach. So in a sense, all human beings, Judaism, of course, we have our own mission, but in general, all human beings reach a state for them of perfection, or at least of righteousness, by following the laws that are given the name of Noach. That's a very high honor that Noach has. So I've taken you through this description in very extreme positive terms of Noach. And yet, as I said to begin with, Noach gets no respect. Everywhere that we talk about Noach and we seem to be praising him, along comes someone to shoot it down. The most famous, of course, and well-known of this idea is the fact that it says, Noach tamim haya b'dorotav. He was wholesome or great or complete in his generation. And almost immediately, Rashi comes and asks, why does it say b'dorotav? Why was he only something special in his generation? Is that coming maybe to qualify whether he truly was a great person? So Rashi already says, Yesh mi rabotenu dorshimo tolishvach. Some want to say that this is high praise, because if he was as great in the generation of corrupt people, as was the generation of the flood that would soon be destroyed for all kinds of evils that they committed, adultery, immorality, theft, if he was great in that generation, kolshkein ilu haya b'dor tzadikim haya tzadik yoter, in a generation where he had much better pure support and people to nudge him forward, he would have been even greater. Or does the fact that it says he was great in his generation may be coming to detract from his greatness? Yeshadorshim oto lignai. Some interpret this as a negative and say, well, lefi doro hayat tzaddik. Compared to all the evil people around him, yeah, then he was indeed righteous and he looked good. But if you put him in a generation of Abraham, says Rashi, lo nechshav liklum. Wow. He would have been considered nothing. That's pretty charif. That's pretty cutting. Now, this is a famous Gemara in Sanhedrin Daf Kuf Chet, where you have this discussion between Rav Yochanan and Reish Lakish, where they expand on it. And they talk about all kinds of comparisons. Noach, one says, he's like a silver coin among copper coins. So he looks great in comparison to the copper. But if you had a plate full of silver, he wouldn't amount to anything special. And then others want to come and say, no, he's like a bottle of perfume in a place that smells very bad. And he gives everything for, he changes everything. The perfume makes the place smell nice. Imagine if he was in a place of perfumes, then it would be even nicer. So, and there's all kinds of mishalim that are given talking about that. But the fact is that why do we have to right away try to downgrade him and degrade him? According to those who say Bidorotav is taken negatively. Yeah, he was great in his generation, but come on, look who he, yes, he could dunk the basketball, but he could outscore the other players, but he was 2 feet taller than them, big deal. If he was living among reasonably tall people, he wouldn't stand out at all, and so on and so forth. And all these phrases that we talked about, somehow they find a way to tweak them in a negative way. For example, we said that Noach walks with God. Et Elokim yitalef Noach. It's a beautiful, lovely phrase. However, along come the commentators and say, yeah, that sounds good. However, what do we say about Abraham? About Abraham, we say, Hitalech lefanai. God says, you go before me. Noach, the most he could do is walk with God. But Abraham, he could go in front of God. And therefore, Noach, yeah, maybe you're not so special after all. Then, as we said before, Noach matzah chen b'nei Hashem. And along comes the Sforno and says on this beautiful phrase, Noach found favor in God's eyes. Don't get carried away and think that Noach is so superhumanly great, says the Sforno. Lo mipnei shehaya ra'ui lekach. He was saved, but not because he really deserved it, says the Sforno. Aval al tzad chanina zachu ha'el itbarach lazeh. God basically did him a favor. Not that he deserved it, but God said, okay, I'll save Noach. And this goes on and on. For example, when Noach is about to get on the teva, on the ark, it says, Mipnei meha mabul. He boarded the teva after 120 years before the waters came on. Says Rashi, Af Noach miktanei emunahaya. Noach was a person of little faith. Ma'amin ve'ino ma'amin. He believed, but he didn't believe. As you might say today, he hedged his bets. That whether the floodwaters would come or not. Lo nichnas l'teva, says Rashi, he didn't enter the ark. ad shedechaku hamayim, until the water basically pushed him into the boat. So before you give him credit, maybe he wasn't quite such a believer as you might think. Well, I'll add one more, and there's really several of these, but here's another one that really, the best you could say is damning with faint praise. That's the perfect phrase here. We're told that there was a window. Sohar, the pasuk says, Sohar ta'aseh lateva. You will make a sohar. Now, it doesn't say chalon. So the rabbis debate, this is before the rabbinic organization, Sohar. So what does it mean? So Amar Rav Yochanan, he, remember, is the one, who was maybe taking a little bit off the praise of Noach in the Gemara there in Sanhedrin. Amar lo HaKadosh Baruch Hu leNoach, kavei ba avanim tovot umargaliot, kedei shiu me'irot lachem kitzarayim. God said to him, you know what the light is going to be in this teva? It's going to be a precious stone. The Medrash says it was a miraculous stone, something which shone night and day, or at least at night, and that would provide him with the light in the teva. The Torah Tamima comes along and says, and tries to dissect this, and says, well, gee, wouldn't it be more logical to say there was a window? And that's where the light came from. After all, when you don't have artificial light, the light comes through your window. Why do they have to go to the trouble of making this miraculous stone? So the Torah Tamima says something quite amazing, and says that, again, quoting Rav Yochanan, it lo kipshuto chalon shel zchuchit. This was not a glass window. And you know why? Because, you see, and I'll just sum this up for you. And again, his going back to Bidorotav and his generation, but not other generations. And again, comparing him to Abraham and saying to him that there was another tragic cataclysmic event. And that was the destruction of Sodom and Amorah. And there, if you remember, Abraham's nephew Lot was told, do not look behind you. Why? Says the Torah Tamima, that it's enough that you were saved, Lot, but you're not great enough to be able to witness the destruction of everybody else as if you're so much greater than they are. No, you're saved because you're Abraham's nephew. That's it. Otherwise, you'd be there too. So don't look behind. Don't, as in a sense, lord it over everybody else that you were saved. And so he says, and that's what we say too about Noach, that chalon shel zchuchit ro'in gamet asher bachutz. If it was a window made of glass, Noach could look out and see the whole world being destroyed. But he wasn't of that caliber. He wasn't great enough to say, you deserve to be saved and everybody else destroyed. So if you can't look out the window. There was no window. There was only this stone, this precious stone that gave out light. And that's how you had light in the ark. But if there would be a window, you would be able to look out at others, and you're not really of that madrega, of that level to do so. Well, and indeed, some even call the flood not the Mabul, but Mei Noach. Yeshayahu says, Ki Mei Noach Zot Li. And that's not too complimentary either, associating Noach with the destruction of the flood. Others, and I see Yehudit wrote in the chat, and it's quite right, that there is that sense of Noach being compared negatively to Moshe Rabbeinu. He's the other person in a teva, and he saved people, and Noach did not. In his 120 years, he couldn't convince anyone. And Therefore, Moshe came along as a tikkun, as a correction for the sin of Noach in a kind of fanciful midrash. Well, all of this is difficult for us to digest because first we talk how wonderful Noach was with all the superlatives, and then we cut him down. And we want to basically shoot down all of these beautiful complimentary things we say about Noach. Why? You know, it's interesting. When we talk about the animals that got on the teva, they were divided into two categories: tehorah, pure or kosher animals, and were the others tameah? No, they are called habehema or habehemot. We say about these animals that, and we use actually 5 words. Habehema asher einena tahorah. And we say the animal that was not tahorah. Why don't we just say tahorah and tameah? Why does the Torah use extra words in all these psukim when the animals are boarding? And we talk about, and just to, in many of the psukim, min habehema asher lo tahorahi. That's the pasuk. Why don't we just say Torah and Tameah? Chazal say because we didn't want to insult or defame the animals and make them feel bad and call them Tameah, impure. So he said, you're pure and you're not so pure. So isn't that amazing? If we don't want to insult the integrity of an animal, so we use extra words so as not to call them Tameah. Why are we doing this to Noach? Why are we shooting him down? Well, I want to suggest to you what I think is the correct answer. Noach was who he was. But Chazal understand that there are different kinds of role models in the universe. You have those who are amazingly great, who are superstars, whether it's Abraham or whether it's Moshe, any of the Avot and Imahot. These are superstars. But the truth is, it's very hard to live up to the level of a superstar and to be that great. We need role models who are attainable, accessible, those who are more or less like we are, good people, solid people, but not necessarily a superstar, so that everyone can say, maybe in life I can't be an Abraham. Who could? At the age of 3, he discovered God and he changed the world. Or Moshe Rabbeinu, who went up and didn't eat or drink for 40 days in Har Sinai. Who can be like that? But you want to save the world? Just be a Noach. That's enough for God to actually start a whole new world for you. And therefore, whenever we try, along comes someone and wants to say, Noach was a superstar, superhuman, he was the great. Comes along other sages to say, hey, don't take Noach out of his category. You're not doing any of us a favor when you bump him up to superstar, because then, yeah, he's greater, but hard to emulate. We need people like Noach to be able to compare ourselves to be able to say, even if you can't be a Moshe Rabbeinu, be a Noach. This is, of course, the famous story with Rab Zusha, who comes in, he's crying and he's worried when he's on his deathbed. And they say, what are you worried about? And he says, I'm not worried that God will say to me, why weren't you a Moshe Rabbeinu? Why weren't you an Avram Avinu? But Zusha, why weren't you Zusha? Just be as great as you can be. And that's the greatness of Noach. That he was more or less just kind of a regular citizen who did the right thing. He didn't change the world. He saved the world, but didn't change the world. He wasn't an Abraham. He couldn't talk people into a greater belief in God, but he never lost his own righteousness. He never lost his own integrity and decency. And therefore, he was able to save himself and start a whole new world. And thus, Noach remains a tremendous model for the world. For those who say, I could never aspire to such greatness, maybe not, but you can always be a Noach. Just retain your own goodness and you can save the world. And that's why I suggest to you the ultimate compliment given to Noach is that we name these 7 fundamental basic mitzvot for humanity after him. The Sheva mitzvot b'nei Noach, to say, people, you don't have to be a superstar. You don't have to be a giant or a genius to make the grade. When someone comes to convert to Judaism, the first thing we really say to them, besides asking if, giving them a sanity check, is we say to them, why do you want to convert? If you think the only way to get to Olam Haba is by being Jewish, that's not correct. We don't believe that. If you keep the Sheva Mitzvot B'nei Noach, if you keep the basic laws of society, then you are also righteous in your own way. And there will be a place for you in Olam Haba. And therefore, Noach is the perfect example for that. Because we're using his name because that's what he did. He had this basic goodness. And in a world that really had turned so topsy-turvy against everything that Hashem was trying to promote for the world, along comes Noach, kind of simple goodness, in that sense, tamim haya, wholesome enough, without any of the superlatives, really, although we give him those, to save the world. And for that, Hashem says, guess what? You're a tzaddik. It doesn't matter to me how you compare to Abraham. Who can be an Abraham? In your own right, in your own way, you're a tzaddik. You're tamim. You're an ish. I like you. Noach matzah chen be'einav. And that is what I suggest is going on here. The rabbis were not trying to denigrate Noach for denigration's sake. What they were doing was saying, let's make sure that Noach stays Noach. And I suggest that the lesson for this, and I'll close with this, but it's something that we all know. Too often there is an attempt to take rabbis and to make superhuman superheroes out of them and assign to them all kinds of miracles that they could do. There are many things that are said, for example, about Rav Moshe Feinstein. They said once that he was getting out of a car and somebody slammed a door on him and, his hand started to turn blue, but he didn't want to embarrass them, so he didn't yell, ouch, which Moshe said, that's ridiculous. That he once drank milk that wasn't Chalav Yisrael and forced himself to throw up, also not true. And one of the stories I like best is that at Rav Moshe Feinstein's funeral, someone got up and said, he was so totally and completely immersed in Torah that he never read or looked at anything secular. Well, his son-in-law told me he was absolutely astounded by the statement, but he couldn't say anything. But at the Shloshim, when he was giving the talk about his father-in-law, he set the record straight. And he said, Rav Moshe, every single morning, there was a competition for his students to bring him the New York Times, which he read from cover to cover every day, including the sports pages. And that's what made him the great posek he was. He knew the world, but he was a human being. Rav Moshe himself talks about the fact that he had an anger problem, that he had to work to control his anger without going into the details. And he tells stories about that. A chassid will always make his Rebbe into a superhuman type of figure. And sometimes that's okay. But it's also important to have role models and rabbis who are real people. They make mistakes. They're not perfect. And therefore, they don't set the bar so high that a person says, I could never be like him. Of course you could. Because he's also just a human being like you. And he used his talents and his gifts and his determination to rise to a higher level, and so can you. But he's not someone that is sent directly from heaven with superhuman powers. And that's a very important thing for us to have, role models that we can relate to. And that's the greatness of Noach. He's not an Abraham. He's not an Adam Harishon who could talk to the animals, although he was pretty good with animals. He's not a Moshe Rabbeinu, but he's Noach. And sometimes the best thing is to let Noach be Noach. And matzah chen b'einei Hashem. Just be that kind of a good person. You'll save your family, and you might save the entire world. I will stop here, and I thank Yossi for recording the share. And if anybody now, if you want to unmute, you're welcome to make any comment or question that you might have.
May I say something, Rabbi Weiss? So there's a classic Western called The Magnificent Seven, where villagers that are being attacked by a fierce band of banditos, probably 100 of them, and they want to hire a few men to fight them off for 2 months, and they give Yul Brenner in this movie $140 to hire men and to fight, and they say it's everything we have. And Yul Brenner said, I've been offered a lot for my work, but never everything. And so you remember that that line? So,
yeah.
You know, here's a guy that spent 120 years building a boat and had to collect all the animals. And I don't know, I think he deserves the respect and the covet.
Yeah, if you think about it, what he did was pretty superhuman because of the whole story with the animals. But it doesn't look like, you know, Noach, I mean, let's face it. When he comes off the ark, what does he do? He plants a vineyard, he gets drunk. Probably what any normal person would do after seeing the world destroyed and dealing with all these animals on an ark for a year. And that's important as well, that, you know, he acted like we would have acted and didn't lord it over himself like, okay, what's my what world can I save next? No, I need a drink. Any other comments or?
Yeah, I always thought that Noach got a very bad rap. All the Parshanim, okay, he was not so great in his generation, okay, but not so great. I never liked it. I think if Noach were here, he would fight it tooth and nail.
Well, that's why the point I'm making is that I think to some extent they weren't trying to put him down. They were trying to keep him where they felt he would be an appropriate role model, as opposed to bumping him up to first class, where people would say, I can't compete with a guy like this. I can't relate to a guy like this. The whole idea of Noach is that you can always relate to somebody and say, if you just be a simple person with good qualities, you can save the whole world yourself. So I think that we give a little bit of danakavskut even to the people who put him down. It wasn't to put him down just for the sake of putting him down. It had a purpose behind it so that Noach retained that model that we need in the Torah. There are others, by the way, like this. I'm not going to go into it now, but as you think about it, there are other people in the Torah as well who have this kind of everyman status. And that's an important model to have as well, you know, as opposed to those people that we say, wow, who could ever live up to that kind of level? All right, so
Rabbi Weiss.
Yes.
Just two comments. One, contrasting Noach with Moshe. Noach started as Ish Sadiq, and he ended up as an Ish Adama. Moshe started as an Ish Mitzri and ended up as an Ish Elokim. That's one thing. The other thing is about your comment about the animals. It gave extra words. Instead of saying Tomei, it said Lo Tahara. But it's very interesting. It doesn't say the animals you should take Zachar Nekeva. It says Ish, Ishto, it says Ishto.
No, but it also says Zachar Nekeva.
Yeah, it says, but it also says Ishto. Now that's kind of strange. Why does it say Ishto? Because Chazal say that the animals also were promiscuous, but the ones he took into the teva, even those that were not lo tahor, they were loyal to the nekeva. The zachar and nekeva were loyal to each other. It's very strange to see the ishto for animals.
True. Good point. Was Noach credited with that? Is it something to his credit that they?
No, the animals he took in were credited. God told him to take, and Noah took the ones that were loyal to their to their own species.
Very good, very nice. Thank you, everyone, and I will look forward to seeing you next week, probably 5:45. But that's going to. But I'll let you know for sure when we figure it out completely. So everybody have a Shabbat Shalom. Stay safe, stay healthy. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All the best, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Wherever you are, stay safe all over the globe.
Thank you.
You too. You too.
Bye-bye.
Message. There's Judy.